Hello, Next to Church family. Welcome back to our series that we titled God Remembers You. Today we're looking at the second and third chapter in the book of Esther. We're seeing that God is not forgetting you. And in fact, He's always working, even as we found out last week when things like the word God is not mentioned in this book, when it seems like there's no hope that these people are going to be forever stuck in this land far from God's promised land that He'd given to the Israelites. But yet, God is still moving. And if we would just open our eyes, see that God is indeed working around us, it'll change our perspective. It'll give us hope. It'll give us belief. And my desire for you today is to first see again in your heart, in your mind, in your passions, what God has called you to. And then in return, to be obedient and to serve Him, to be faithful in the little things. And it is what we're going to see in the life of the character Mordecai. Now, if you don't know the story very well and you weren't with us last week, maybe you need to go back and listen to the intro message about this book. But in short, Mordecai was Esther's cousin. He was, of course, older, and he was charged with seeing and watching over his cousin because her parents had passed away. We can only assume that it was during the raids, but we don't really know. It could have been at any time. And so Mordecai has Esther seemingly propelled to be in the harem that would be chosen from to be the next queen. And of course, as we read in the beginning of chapter 2, Esther was indeed put as queen over the, at that time, largest empire in the world. And so here we have this slave girl in a foreign land propelled unknowingly as a slave to be the queen. And now we hone in on this character, Mordecai. And it's almost like we forget about Esther for a little bit in this story, and we really focus in on Mordecai. This book is so beautiful, and I encourage you to dig in for yourself and read this for yourself in your quiet times and just reflect on it and how there's so much that we can apply to our lives. So let's get into this. We're going to read Esther chapter 2, verses 19 to the end of the chapter, just a few verses, and then we'll pick up in chapter 3 after that. When the virgins were gathered a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not revealed her family background or her ethnicity as Mordecai had directed. She obeyed Mordecai's orders as she always had while he raised her. So beautiful. During those days while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bitham and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the entrance, became infuriated and planned to assassinate King Ahasuerus. We'll just call him Xerxes because it's much easier to pronounce. When Mordecai learned of the plot, he reported it to the queen, Esther, and she told the king on Mordecai's behalf. When the report was investigated and verified, both men were hanged on the gallows. This event was recorded in the historical record in the king's presence. Yes. Interesting, right? So we have the queen elevated. Esther is in the presence of King Xerxes. And now we have this story of Mordecai, seemingly just like out of nowhere, this is brought to attention. And it was brought to the king that there are two people plotting against him that did not like him. Mordecai was being a good man. He was serving the king. He was found on the inside of the gates, which is important to understand because Mordecai, being a Jew, would typically not be allowed into that area where the king's influencers were. But yet somehow his character and what he had done throughout his life brought him into a place of influence in the king's court. But he had not risen to a place where he could go in the king's presence. And so he notified Esther. And Esther, as she had done her whole life, revealing how amazing her character was, still listened to her cousin. So, why did Mordecai do this? Why did Mordecai even care? Like, this, you got to remember, this is a king that is partly responsible for him not being in his native land. Why would he serve him honestly, with integrity, and reveal a plan to remove him? Maybe if King Xerxes was removed, maybe Mordecai could go back into his promised land and live with his people and go back and rebuild the city walls and see Israel established again. And the reality is if he was caught snitching on these two individuals, undoubtedly they would go out and kick him in the butt and he would never return, right? Like, he risked his life for the sake of a guy he could never approach, a guy who was his enemy. Yet, in his faithfulness to his earthly king, he had Esther, the only one who could go into the presence of the king, go and warn him. And that's it. The event was recorded in the king's presence, and whoopee, it's gone. It's just this weird blip in the story, but if you know the story, you know that it shows up again and has great importance later in the story. But as of now, if you were just in this story, if you were actually there in the moment, alongside of Mordecai, his faithfulness seemed to not pay off, not do a whole lot of good, didn't elevate him anymore, didn't take anything away from him. It seems insignificant. If that was you, you risked your life for the sake of the king, and you get no recognition other than your name might have been mentioned in the records. Just doesn't pay off in the time we think it should, right? Maybe, goodness, maybe you're sitting in there in your 8-to-5 job, doing your thing every day, being honest, being faithful, not wasting time of the company, doing everything you're supposed to, not wasting time on the internet, surfing, not taking extra long breaks. You're doing what you're supposed to do. And it's not paying off. You're not going up the ladder. You're not making more money. In fact, people who are dishonest and clamoring and trying to work their way up the ladder are beating you out. Maybe you're trying to serve God faithfully in a small little place, and there's no proof of you slaving away. At how many missionaries I've heard who have been in a country for years and years and don't have one convert. They keep plowing, keep serving. They're not lazy. They're not trying. They're planting God's word as faithfully as they can without being killed. But yet, they don't have a convert. They haven't had many gospel conversations. So often seems like it was for nothing. But when we are faithful, I want you to get this today. God does some amazing things. We may never know. We may not see the ramifications of it on this side of heaven. And in fact, in Mordecai's situation, his payoff almost didn't come until post-death, as we will see in chapter 3. So moving on to verse 1. After all this took place, King Xerxes honored Haman. Here it is, Haman, the evil character, right? This is the dark side of the universe coming to surface. This is what we referenced last week when we said we see very little of what's going on in the spiritual world. But there was something going on in this moment. The enemy saw what God was doing, that God was working things out to have his people have favor in the kingdom. Mordecai was rising up. Esther was rising up now to the practically most powerful person in all of the land. And Satan takes notice. He doesn't want God's people to go back to the promised land. He knows that when they're where they're supposed to be and they start following God and serving him, the proclamation of God's message goes out. So he takes notice, and up comes Haman, rising up to be King Xerxes' right-hand man. So here we have the queen elevated, and the king elevating the enemy. Two powerful forces right in the middle is Xerxes going at it. Fascinating. So Xerxes honors Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. He promoted him in rank and gave him a higher position than all the other officials. The entire royal staff at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman because the king had commanded this to be done for him. But Mordecai would not bow down or pay homage. Why? Because he would not bow down to anybody, right? Only God. The members of the royal staff at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why are you disobeying the king's command?" When they had warned him day after day and he still would not listen to them, they told Haman in order to see if Mordecai's actions would be tolerated since he had told them he was a Jew. People knew he was this enemy. He was a slave. He was in exile. He wasn't one of us. What are you going to do? Tolerate this? Tolerate these kind of people? When Haman saw that Mordecai was not bowing down or paying him homage, he was filled with rage. How in the world could one guy's disobedience to bow down cause rage? But listen to this. This wasn't the end of it. Not only was he filled with rage, when he learned of Mordecai's ethnic identity, it seemed repugnant to Haman to do away with Mordecai alone. He planned to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout Xerxes' kingdom. What many people don't know is that the Amalekites, where Haman came from, the descendant of an Amalekite, they were direct enemies of the Israelites. And it wasn't just enough that Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. It was the fact that he was an Israelite. Couldn't stand him. Here is an enemy of my people in rank of the officials inside the king's court. And he's not bowing down to me. He was ordered to by the king. How could this be? I am so filled with rage, I'm going to have every single one of his people annihilated. Like, talk about a low point, right? Like, we are almost there. Not quite low enough yet. But it's going to have them all killed. In the first month, the month of Nisan, the king Xerxes' 12th year, the pur, that is, the lot, was cast before Haman for each day and each month, and it fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. Then Haman informed King Xerxes, there is one ethnic group scattered throughout the peoples in every province of your kingdom, keeping themselves separate. They're not one of us. They won't participate and ingrain themselves in our culture. They need to be denied of their rights. They need to be annihilated. Their laws are different from everyone else's, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is in the king's best interest, or it is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If the king approves, let an order be drawn up authorizing their destruction, and I will pay 375 tons of silver to the officials for a deposit in the royal treasury. Like, I'm so angry at them. I'm going to put 375 tons of silver as payment to their death? This guy is meaning business. The king removed his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jewish people. Then the king told Haman, the money and people are given to you to do with as you see fit. The royal scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and the order was written exactly as Haman commanded. It was intended for the royal satraps, the governors of each of the provinces, and the officials of each ethnic group, and written for each province in its own script, and each ethnic group in its own language. It was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers in each of the royal provinces, telling the officials to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jewish people, young and old, women and children, and plunder their possessions on a single day, the 13th day of Adar, the 12th month. A copy of the text issued as law throughout every province was distributed to all the people so that they might get ready for that day. The couriers left, spurred on royal command, and the law was issued in the fortress of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink while the city of Susa was in confusion. Could you imagine? Like, where did this come from? If you were a Jewish person and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you hear of this command that's going throughout this massive empire, right? All the way from the easternmost parts of Turkey, all the way down to the western parts of northern Africa and everything in between, the whole Middle East, as we know it, the Muslim countries, it was announced. Kill all the people. Take all their possessions. We do not want a single one of them left on the face of this earth. Like Hitler times 5 million, right? Like, this is crazy. What's going on here? It seems as if there is no hope. There is no way that they could do battle against this massive empire. They were enslaved. They were in captivity. They didn't have any kind of horses or weaponry to battle. They were nobodies. They were no different than they were when they were in Egypt, held captive. In fact, there was even probably less of them because the northern tribes were gone. And now you have just these few tribes left of Judah/Benjamin, right? There's no hope. There's nothing. It seemed like it was gone. But yet the date of destruction is interesting. And it points again to God being in the background. They cast lots. Like, why did Haman cast lots to do this? Like, any right-minded person that's not filled with rage and just going berserk on everybody, like, a sane person would be like, okay, we're going to map out, okay, the furthest person away. Once they hear it, that's when we can announce that day of destruction. Once those furthest Western African countries hear about it, we can say, annihilate them. But he didn't. He cast a lot. It gave God time to move. More than enough time. More than enough time. God was working in the background. What about Xerxes in this story? We have the most powerful person on the face of the earth at the time, absolutely clueless to what he's doing. He's listening to this madman go off about how he wants to kill every single one of these Jewish people because of their different laws. They're not one of us. Like, who in their right mind would ever say, yeah, go and kill them all? Like, these are your slaves. How many thousands of people will you not have in your workforce anymore as free servants? Like, what are you doing? He was absolutely clueless to one of his most faithful people who was in his courts. Mordecai would be destroyed. The guy who saved his own life would be on death row. Not to mention the fact that he had no clue that his own wife would be annihilated along with everyone. Because, as Mordecai would later say so powerfully, and what Esther is known for, if you don't rise up, God will provide another way. Because if you don't step up, you will also be on the cutting block. Your own life is on the line. What was he doing? But the greatest impact would not even be realized by Haman himself. He had no clue. Mordecai, unfortunately, seemed at this point to be losing because of his faithfulness, because he wasn't willing to back down to this crazy man and continue to only bow down to his God. It seemed like all was lost. But sometimes, friends, it's easy to believe that if we serve God, we won't experience some kind of trouble or pain. I think in this passage, God is showing us that that is not true. That sometimes we're called to be right in the middle of the thick of it. That we are called to be faithful even in the mundane. God asks us to be faithful for the long term. I love how Darrell Bell put it. He said, we think giving our all to the Lord is like taking a $1,000 bill and laying it on the table. Here is my life, Lord. I'm giving it all. Isn't that what it kind of feels like when we enter into the family of God? Like it's that major decision moment, right? Like the lights are flashing just right and the mood is right. The music is playing. The message was so powerful. It worked in your heart and in your mind. And you just lay it down and say, God, I'll do anything. I'll serve you. I'll go anywhere. I'll do anything, right? I can remember that so well in my childhood. But that's not how God works. Yeah, we have to make that decision and put our life down for God, but it's not how it works. You see, the reality is he's not asking us to lay down that $1,000 bill. He's asking us to go to the bank, cash out that $1,000, and get a bunch of quarters, and go through life putting down that 25 cents here, that 50 cents here, just being faithful over and over. See, that's what it was for Mordecai. It wasn't just that one-time event, right? He was faithful over and over. Going back to chapter 2, when it seemed like it was such an insignificant, why would he even let the king know about these wicked servants? He was faithful. He was faithful even in the mundane. So how about us? I don't think that God just comes out and asks every single person to go to be a missionary in some highly sensitive area where if you mention God, you'll be dead, right? Like that's not what God asks us all to do. It may be the way that we want to go and what we envision, but isn't it more like listening to the neighbor kid's trouble instead of saying, get out of here, I got more important things to do? Slow down when you're in the middle of that big project and they just keep asking you questions of how are you doing that? What's going on here? Go away, I got to get this done. Or maybe it's when we're spending our vacation. And instead of going to that massive, nice resort somewhere, we're staying in the community and we're giving our time and our money to an organization or a group of people that need it. Or maybe it's giving that cup of water to that shaky old man at the nursing home. Giving our life to Christ is seldom glorious, isn't it? It's done in those little acts of service, 25 cents at a time. It's so hard to live a Christian life, little by little, over the long haul. It'd be so much easier just to go out in this big flash and give it all for Jesus and be remembered as that awesome Hudson Taylor of the 21st century. But it's hard when you get rejected. Nobody likes you. You don't get that front page in the newspaper for being faithful to God. Now, the result of Mordecai's faithfulness may be a bit extreme, but let me tell you, the choices you make every day add up to eternity for those around you. Say that again. The choices you make every day add up to an eternity for those who are around you. They're watching. They're listening. They see your character, your faithfulness, your kindness. They hear the words you speak. They see the way you sacrifice your desires for the benefit of others. People are watching. They're listening. They care more for who you are and what you do than what you say you are. Are you what you publicly pronounce behind the scenes? So as we wrap up our time today, and we just spend some time reflecting, I want to ask you to write down just a few actions of what faithfulness in the mundane looks like for you. Just a couple of things. What would that look like? Maybe it's being a positive encourager at your work or your school. Could be not cutting corners at work. Or it could be inviting that person who irritates you out to lunch. How is being faithful in the mundane look? It doesn't win you any special awards. It doesn't make you feel like you're a superhero. But I bet that those little acts will add up to something someday. It might not add up to what we will read of in the life of Mordecai and how he gets elevated, but that's not what it's about. It's about faithfully serving the one who gave it all so that you could find life and life in abundance. A life that spending eternity in a place where there's no pain, no sorrow, no mourning, no anger. So as we close up today, write those few things down and find one that you can practice this week. Look at the positives. See what God is doing. Open up your heart. And in the middle of the mundane, you will see God. Father, I pray for every person listening today that you will open up their hearts and help them to see what you see. Help them to act how you would act, to practice the fruit of the Spirit, to practice the Beatitudes, and to find joy in the mundane, find joy in being faithful right where they are. Because, God, those will pay off. We so want it to pay off today. But, God, the long haul is what really matters. So remind us of that now in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for joining us on this message, Nexus Church family. And come back next week when we dig into this massive story that's going to take a big turn in just a moment and see how God is moving when it seems like there's no hope. Catch you next week.